Thank you, everyone, and welcome to our second keynote in the What Works conference. I'm pleased and honored to introduce Dr. Brian Dewsbury, who's an associate professor of biological sciences at Florida International Institute. He's a Gardner Institute fellow, and he's the principal investigator of the Science, Education, and Society Research Program, which focuses on the social context of teaching and learning in a variety of education contexts. He's ultimately interested in helping to reframe the education discussion to better address questions of equity and community building. His work addresses pressing issues such as student retention in STEM fields, the underrepresentation of minority groups in certain STEM fields, and the role of student and instructor affect in promoting student learning gains. He uses the results of those efforts to help faculty develop inclusive curricula and sense of community in the classroom. I do want to recognize that our keynotes at this conference have been supported by the Ohio 5 Collaborative Grants Program and Kenyon's Anti-Racism Fund. So I will turn it over to Dr. Dewsbury for his talk on the promise and practice of inclusive teaching.
Thanks. And, I'm sorry that, well, first of all, I'm sorry we're not in person, right? I mean, at this point, that's sort of the standard. Sorry, huh?
What did Kasha just say?
1 second, guys. I'm sorry. I'm home. You can use the card. Yeah, I'm sorry that we can't do these things in person. But when you're home, you have to get locks fixed in your house. At the same time, you have to give a keynote, and so therefore you have to tell the locksmith, "Hey, here's this thing you could use while I talk to Kenyon College, many states away." So we can achieve all. That's all right. But I did get a chance to look at what's been presented so far, and it's just a really inspirational group of talks, and I hope that between all of it, you got things that you found that were useful. I can just imagine what this would have felt like if we were all in the same physical place. I'm gonna just quickly share my screen, make sure that can. Can you give me a thumbs up that you see my presentation screen and not the slide deck?
Yes, so we're seeing the presenter view, but that's okay. I mean, that's what we're getting.
All right, let me try one more time because it doesn't work this time, we'll live. I don't want to spend all day figuring out. Still presenter view?
It is.
Yeah,
but
we'll live. We'll
read the slide.
Yeah, we'll live. So the question here then is, before we want to really know what works, we need to know the thing we want our teaching to work for. We need to take 10 steps back, and I get it. Like, I've been in this space a while, and I understand how many of my wonderful colleagues want us to come and say, "Hey, here are the 10 things to do in your class, and I promise you by Monday everything will be inclusive." I get that we have limited bandwidth, and we are asked to do 100 things as faculty members and practitioners, and oh, by the way, support your local grocery store. I mean, there's no time for anything, and you're being asked to do more and more and more with less and less resources, right? In a shorter amount of time. And I would love nothing more than to just hit a pause button, to have us all go on a national collective retreat and ask the question, what are we doing here? What is this all supposed to lead to? Are we reinventing the same wheel where you come in, you take a class, you get a degree, you know a little bit of biology, you know a little bit of chemistry, some literature, you get a job somewhere? Or is there a higher goal that we're missing? Somewhere somebody wrote that higher education and education in general, K-20, is a space where we prepare people to be full engagers in an evolving democracy. to be full participants in that, to understand that to be part of this society is to be cognizant that it's an experiment, that we are different people, that we have to agree on very tough questions, that we have to love one another, that we have to make decisions that's not going to just affect you and your family, but everybody in the neighborhood. And K-12 and college was a place where through subject matter, we're able to teach people that when you get out there in the workforce, when you get out there in your community, you're not just doing a job, you're participating in something. So my friends, it's not that I'm against best practices. It's that when I talk about inclusion, I'm playing for the long game. I'm playing for a student who goes on to become a father, a mother, a church member, an employee, a voter, a customer at a grocery store, somebody who buys things online. I'm thinking of that decision-making process. And when I think of it that way, all of a sudden the biology that I teach, it's fine, I enjoy it, but it's actually subservient to the greater aspirations I have for who's in front of me. So I call this the promise and practice of inclusive teaching, because as much as I'm encouraged by the efforts I'm seeing, by the papers I'm reading, by some of the programs that I'm seeing, there's an imaginary we haven't hit yet. There's an imaginary we have yet to even construct, right? From which we can backward design to do even more radical things than what we're doing right now. And in order to do that, we need time. I can know the nice entry point is do these 5 things and just, slowly but surely, I get it, do that too. But you need time to commit to a journey that takes a while. And I fully understand why that time tends to not exist. Think for a second of how ridiculous our job as professors are. Just think about it. If you wanted to be a doctor, what would you do? You'd be a STEM major, you go to med school, you do a fellowship, you do a residency, then you'd practice, right? And in fact, if you went to a doctor who didn't do that, you might be a little bit hesitant to take any advice from that individual. If you wanted to be a lawyer, you went to political science or English major, you went to law school, you apprentice. Why is it that to be a college professor, you can spend 6.5 to 10 years studying the left side of a frog's eye, become the world's expert in that one tiny thing, and then you get a job and they say, oh, by the way, there's an intro class for you to teach? Why are we okay with that mediocrity? Right? Like knowing, well, perhaps I shouldn't say knowing, because maybe we don't know, right? Maybe we are okay with telling ourselves that teaching a college classroom is not something people need to be intentionally trained for. Maybe we are okay with saying that so long as you have subject matter expertise, you can therefore teach students. So while I am applauding workshops and conferences like this and all the workshops I've had a privilege to be a part of and run myself, we are workshopping on the back end. We are all already employed, right? So if we truly want to make radical changes to how this is viewed, that change has to start in the pathway. You have to say to yourself, I'm going to accept a chapter less so that this graduate student can get actual training in teaching. You are going to have to say, when we read resumes for people who are coming here to teach, regardless of your institutional type, if I'm going to hand you a class, I need to see real evidence that you have been trained in this skill. Not that you happen to have done it, that you actually have training in it. So it's a culture that encourages us to just look at fine elements of the problem. In that, you want students to talk to each other, do group work. You want to include Black and brown images in your slides, go to the Teaching and Learning Center and they'll give you examples. And while I want all of that to happen, for those of us who are in a position to look at this issue systematically, do know that you have to look at very broad elements of a very complex system. And the pathways to the professoriate is part of that. So I want to share with you three what I think are worthy goals of education. And I put inclusive in brackets because maybe my own goal is that one day we wouldn't need the word in brackets. Maybe one day, once you say the word education, once you say the word you're teaching, people understand that to do that well, you are doing it inclusively. Yeah. That doesn't become an add-on to other types of teaching. That doesn't become a special thing that requires a best practice greatest hits list. That becomes the expectation of what you do when you walk in a classroom.
Good job.
And so we start off, you know, I get it. We're in the phase now of we're building this language, we're building this culture. But let's keep our eye on where this is going, right? And so for that to happen, how you identify should not be predictive of the outcomes you have in a classroom. And these are the things that we all sort of normally refer to as outcomes gaps. When you disaggregate data from practically every university in the United States, you see these, and we all sit around and shed a tear and shake our heads at what needs to change and why this is happening. But Diane Ravitch, a K-12 scholar who I love, you know, said it best in her book, Reign of Error. She said, don't talk to me about school reform until you're talking about universal pre-K, until you're talking about healthcare for pregnant mothers, until you're talking about neighborhoods in poverty. Don't talk to me about school reform. Don't put it on the school. Talk to me about the neighborhood. Talk to me about the community. And so in the same way, I'm saying to you that part of the curriculum we have to engage in as professors or as future professors, before we think about strategies and all these things, are all the elements, all of the factors in the United States that cause identity to predict success. So after the heads are shaking, after the tears are shed, and after the "this is so sad" statements are made, go do your homework, go start reading and try to figure that out. There are some national things and there are some local things. But you have to make the commitment to engage all of it. Secondly, commit to a life of inquiry. What does that mean? One of my favorite historians, Jill Lepori, wrote a book called These Truths. And in an interview about that book with David Rubenstein, I believe, which is in another book called The American Experiment, another strongly suggested read, she talks about how the Declaration of Independence, which was mostly written by Jefferson, was obviously an imperfect human being, but was heavily influenced by Enlightenment principles. Right. So I want to just stay with me here, right? Because I know sometimes when we talk about history, we can run the risk of getting into presentism, right? Judging people at that age, how with the values we have now, right? But just stick with me on the structure here. The idea of the founders, or at least him in particular, is that the elements of inquiry is going to be very necessary for a nation that is composed of people who are very, very, very different, right? Geographically different, ethnically different, and of course there were issues with women and slaves, et cetera, et cetera. But Lepori's interpretation of this, and again, based on the Enlightenment, is that if you're going to be part of this democratic shared governance society, you have to commit to that life of inquiry. What does that mean? That doesn't mean everyone is a scientist. But that means everyone acknowledges that for this country to work, for the American experiment to work, even though we may not agree on a number of things, from what direction the road should be paved to whether it should be limited or limited government or a big social safety net, for this to work and to not just be fighting all the time, we have to be able to compromise. We have to be able to ask questions and be wrong about the answers that we suppose, right? And figure out a solution that could mostly benefit the majority. And regardless of what classroom students are in, this is a skill, this dialogic skill is something that can be actively engaged. Third, the goal of education, a goal of education is to have students understand the social contract. By this, I don't mean socialism. I mean a social contract. I mean that you live with people. I don't necessarily mean in your house in particular, although that is probably true as well. But I mean that the decisions you make, the things you vote for, how you spend your money, how you drive your car, the kind of car you drive, these things impact others. And to be anti-Ayn Rand about this, how we go about making decisions can't be just framed in terms of your individual desires, right? And I know it's a little bit of a rabbit hole, but the reason why this is a key goal for me is that the temptation in the disciplinary structure that we have in higher education is that the class is just about this one thing. It's just about biology, right? It's just about chemistry. But part of understanding those disciplines is understanding the ways in which the individuals who are allowed to ask the research questions and interpret the data in very particular ways did so in ways that sometimes harmed large groups of people. And so if the mindset is I'm just training a chemist to be a chemist, I don't understand that that chemist or that biologist or that physicist is a human being whose mindsets and whose biases are informed by cultural things, by history, by their own socialization, then you do run the risk of some of these really egregious things repeating themselves. In other words, you might look at data as a neutral thing. You might look at experiments as a neutral thing, but the practice of science, because it's humans doing it, by definition, cannot be neutral. And so part of teaching the beauty of it is teaching how it can go awry if you don't incorporate the human element. So I'm going to talk to you today about what I have to say is my favorite class. It's maybe I'm just sort of a counter-current kind of guy, right? But if you work at a Research One university, you would know that intro science is the class research faculty run away from, like sometimes physically, right? I mean, you never see a faculty meeting clear out as quickly when the question of who will teach intro bio comes up, right? But to be fair, if a university, especially at a research university, communicates to you that your value at this institution is based on your research productivity, and oh, by the way, we'll use a unvalidated Likert scale for your teaching, which you don't really care about, then because mortgages don't pay themselves and kids have to go to college, you will orient your professional behavior towards the ways in which you're compensated. And I'm not trying to let faculty off the hook, but I'm just letting you know that there might be people who are believers of what we are talking about here today. But the structure of how faculty contracts are set up communicate a different value system. So to the deans and the provosts and the chairs and the presidents in our midst, should they be here? You are asking the question, how do I go about making real change? You look at your policies. I've read enough Black Lives Matter statements to last me until 2025. I'm good, I get it. Many of you all believe that. It's on your website. Show me your budget sheet. Show me your tenure policies. Show me how you support faculty when they, if they go on maternity leave, if you have that. Show me your hiring policies. Show me what you invest in to support people to be on this journey and to get continued professional development. Our love language in inclusion has to be acts of service, not just words of affirmation. And that service has to be tangible and it has to be resourced. So intro bio is a special class because for me, I take it as a responsibility. I see it as, it's for many of the students that I've taught, it's the first science class they're taking at the college level. It's a major inflection point in their journey to be sometimes medicine, sometimes something health related. That tends to be the majority of what I teach. Some end up going into research. And for those who came out of neighborhood high schools, and when those high schools reflected a demographic that was characteristic of the neighborhood, coming to this university is sometimes an introduction for them into a completely new social environment, which if I'm not attentive to the psychologies that emanate from that newness, can end up impeding their ability to be excellent in that class. So from that standpoint, I submit to you that intro bio is more intro than bio. The bio part is fine. I mean, we do a lot of bio. Don't get me wrong. I'm not just absconding all the content. But I'm saying that to do this class well, there was a lot of things about the psychology of the 18-year-old brain I had to understand in order to design the different elements of the class to not make those things harmful. So let's give a couple examples of this, right? Why are demographics still predictive? Because many of us haven't done our homework yet. Many of us have a very limited understanding of American history. Many of us have been given a very sanitized version of what informs the social structures that you see today. And when you have lived with that sanitized version of events, it is very easy to tell yourself, what's the matter? What's the big deal? Why must you teach things in class that make people feel bad? It's easy to say that when you don't know the facts. And so part of the curriculum I'm asking for is to fully engage people with the facts, not as a one-off workshop, not as a one-off book club, but as months and months and months of reading and reflecting and asking even tougher questions, right? When I moved from Miami to Providence, Rhode Island back in 2014, I understood that the students I was going to teach in URI were different to students that I taught at FIU. And I wanted to understand from a local perspective, what are the social forces that inform who ends up going to the University of Rhode Island? And if you haven't been to Rhode Island, you should. It's a wonderful state. It's tiny, even though the people there don't seem to realize that. It's lovely springs and summers. It has a really unique place in American history. The first Black militia was in Newport. Roger Williams started the first kind of what we might now call progressive values, which is what founded the state. But it also has elements of history that people don't like to talk about. Like 90% of the slave ships that were built for the transatlantic slave trade were built in Rhode Island. I don't think you'd even see a sign. You just go to Warren, Rhode Island, if you want to go check that out. One of the first federal government grants called the Urban Renewal Grant, which is what we probably call gentrification now, was awarded to the city of Providence. Displaced an entire Black community and resituated them to the south of the city. So if you go to the city, some of the demographics you see is still reflective of that. And this map is a redlining map, which is something that wasn't unique to Providence, but happened all over the US. And just to refresh your memory, in case you haven't heard of this or haven't heard about it in a while, it was a federal policy where loans were being given to allow Americans to purchase houses at lower rates or no interest rates to get them back up of their feet in the 1930s after the Great Depression. There was a separate board that was commissioned to color code different neighborhoods in the city based on what they call desirability for lending, meaning like how likely are you to pay money back. So blue and green were considered highly desirable. Yellow was considered declining, which on this map were mostly Jews. And the red neighborhoods were Black and Hispanic and Eastern European immigrants, and that's where the term redlining comes from. This was policy until the Fair Housing Act of 1968. And of course, likely unofficially done years and years after that. So you have to understand that in this type of economy, where home ownership is a major way where most families build capital that you can then pass on to children and grandchildren, if you are denying whole swaths of a population the opportunity to do that, think of the generational effects of that, right? So like I said, you can pass a law, but passing a law doesn't necessarily mean you change behavior. So there was a local bank that was accused of redlining and had an out-of-court settlement. I wouldn't read this aloud for you. And this was just 8 years ago. This was actually the year I got to Providence. Remember, I just said that started in the 1930s. And you might be wondering, well, Brian, what does this have to do with intro bio? Well, the answer is many of my students of color come from Providence. They come from those red-lined neighborhoods in Providence. So no, I can't solve 100 years of redlining in one semester of intro bio. But when you understand the history, your mindset changes. You understand that it's not that these kids aren't capable. It's not that they can't do biology. But you understand that they've been put through the ringer in some cases. Yes, I'm not trying to infantilize, right? Many are resilient, many rise above and perform in spite of, and we celebrate it. But after you celebrate, I want you to also think of, but why should they have to rise above? Why should they have to be resilient? Why aren't we putting attention to the things that they're being resilient to? So at the very least, in the intro bio space, we're not dropping the rigor. We're increasing the support structure. We're creating a new environment that says to you, whatever your yesterdays were, we are going to show you how to create a bright tomorrow. Whatever happened in the past, whatever the high school was like, whatever science curriculum you were shown or not shown, who showed up for class and who didn't, and what you were told about ability, this is a new day. And any notion of, oh, these kids today are underprepared and they don't know how to. If you understand that history, your language about that will be very, very different. So just to give you a couple examples of how we respond to this, right? And you can probably tell by now, intro bio is a class of a lot of moving parts. If I had to really break down the anatomy of that class, we'll be here till tomorrow, right? Two things. We change what most people call office hours. We don't even call it office hours. We call it student hours. We actually don't even call it student hours. We call it the learning lounge, which is cheesy. I know, judge me, I don't care, but we call it that. And the reason why we call it that is because, and maybe I'm sensitive to this because I'm a first generation college student myself, but when you don't know the hidden curriculum, you make all kinds of assumptions about what people mean when they say certain things. I literally had students tell me they thought office hours was when professors got a chance to check their email. And you think, but it's on the syllabus, because that's what you say, right? It's on the syllabus, so check your syllabus. And I get it, they should. But when you have the curse of knowledge, you kind of assume everybody else knows what you're talking about when you use certain phrases. So that's one problem. The second problem is that, again, first generation students sometimes, and students from certain cultural backgrounds sometimes, there is a fear and an angst to approach a professor to ask for help for something. There is a feeling that to come and say that I still don't understand this is indicative of their inability to do the subject. So while to you it may seem like, I'm here, it's on the syllabus, just come and talk to me, walking down that corridor to your office can feel like walking the Green Mile. And so the question you then have to ask yourself is, well, okay, do you cuddle? Do you hold their hand? And I say, yes, I do. Not to hold their hand until they become 85, but to say, if my goal is to get you to not just the second semester of biology, but to teach you that you can thrive in science. If I just sat back and said, it's on my syllabus, you need to come and see me, and then you didn't come and you got an F because of that and left STEM, who wins? Did I show you that I'm tough and keep my standards high and I'm not here to hold your hand? Who wins in that scenario? So we call it student hours, and we actually hold it in the dorm. Why? Because if all of them came to my office, I don't know what kind of office you have, but unless you're Joe Biden, it probably has like 2 chairs and one way you sit. And if everybody came, they won't fit. So even the structure of how office hours typically takes place is really not encouraging a large amount of people to come. Like if they did come, there'd be nowhere to be. So we simply move it to the dorm, and I have colleagues who do it in like a coffee shop or the Learning Commons if your campus has that. And there's a basement room that has 50 chairs and 3 whiteboards. And we average 40 a week. And we hold it at different times, because if we just held it at one time and that time clashed with the students' other class, they wouldn't be able to come for the entire semester. And the students who are doing well, they come too. And when they come, I say, okay, you understand DNA replication really well. I want you to explain this to this group and make sure they get it just as well as you do. And the Megans of the class go on to be my learning assistant for the next iteration of the class. I'm playing for the long game. Secondly, how do I give feedback? I can talk a little bit longer about the fact that I have a very diffuse assessment model, right? There's a bunch of exams, a bunch of quizzes. A lot of the class is very formative in nature. And the idea is to sort of build confidence and build identity and build belonging, and not get into this high stakes environment that messages to you your self-worth based on one score. But one key part of this is the feedback process, right? Let me just walk you through it real quick. About the end of week 3 or 4, I would have given a major exam. I would have had about 4 quizzes. I would have had a major group assignment, a couple other things, right? So I have a whole bunch of grade data from different types of assessments. I would also have a reflection assignment that I give them at the first day of class and some basic info about themselves. And also, by the way, the last question on the summative exam is to predict your score out of 50, right? The exam is out of 50 points. I ask them to predict their score out of 50. And then I regress the predicted score versus the actual score. And you can imagine how funny that graph looks. I'm gonna get a 48, got a 32. It's fine, right? The class is set up that even if you fail that first exam, you actually still have a very clear pathway to still get a good grade in the class. The point is for that exam to act as a wake-up call, to act as a feedback mechanism, so you and I know where you're at. So what I do is I look at the bottom 40% of my roster and I call them in for one-on-one meetings. And I ask the question, you thought you were gonna get a 48. You legit took this exam and walked out that room thinking this is an A+ performance. And you got 16 points less. So let's talk about that 16 points. Like how did you know that you know this? And why, what's the difference between my perception of you knowing and yours? So walk me through how you study. And I get it tried and true. I was in the library till 2 a.m. I read the book 9 times, and it's like, okay, let me know everything you did from the moment you sat down until you got out. And typically what they lack is a self-assessment stage. There's a lot of reading, and no point when they go into a blank whiteboard or a blank sheet of paper and being able to explain this to somebody new, which is why to the bottom left of your screen, that is our class slogan. You do not understand something until you can explain it to someone else. The reason why we go through this whole conversation is because the worst thing I can do in that moment is to tell them to try harder. For 2 reasons. One, most of my students are actually trying really hard. Effort is not the issue. Strategy is the problem. So if I just say try harder, they will either double down on the same bad strategies, just 10 times as hard, or they will tell themselves, well, if I'm trying this hard and I'm failing, then clearly I'm not cut out for this subject. So what you want to do is give them feedback on behaviors that are changeable. You make this an experiment. All right, I see what you're doing. Try to cut down on the reading and spend a little bit more time testing yourself, maybe every 25, 30 minutes. Let's try that and see what happens in the next place. So now it becomes a process of things that are actionable on. And it's not saying like you are now defined by this 32 over the 50 you got one time. And it also acknowledges that so many of my students have come through a system where they were basically worksheeting their way through science. And now for the first time in their lives, someone is saying, no, you have agency here. This is not a factual statement just because I'm wearing a shirt and a tie and I'm a professor. You have to have agency to be able to explain this yourself. And so when you're explaining this to your roommate, you have to be able to field questions. You have to start adopting the manner and persona of an expert. I don't just want you to know facts. I want you to develop into a scientist. Secondly, we design a class where they do science and not just talk about it. And I don't simply mean having a lab credit where you run experiments. I mean, you ask yourself what scientists do. You ask yourself what you would want of future citizens in terms of critical consciousness and being critical consumers of information. And you use the beauty of science and the principles of science to help train those skills, right? And this, you understand that in the inquiry process, in trying to find answers, you do so with people, right? You do so knowing that sacred cows that you might have held dear for most of your life are now ripe to be interrogated, and you have to be open to that remaking process, as Paulo Freire says. And so in order for you to be open to that, we have to have a classroom where there's some comfort in being willing to engage in that. So what most people call group work, we call opportunities for dialogue. Because that is exactly what it can be if you're thinking of the long game. Yes, they are in groups, but I socially engineer those groups. They're mixed ethnically, by stated gender, by geography. Yes, they're in groups, but they're not just doing 3 pages of Punnett squares. They're taking on socially fractious issues. They're talking about Henrietta Lacks, they're talking about COVID, they're talking about vaccine use. And no, I don't just throw them into the fire and say, okay, third day of class, discuss Tuskegee. We spend like a day and a half talking about difficult dialogues. What it means to be actively listening. What it means to hear an opinion that makes you internally upset. But instead of reacting emotionally, taking a step back and saying, I wonder what made that person feel this way. I wonder why things have become so difficult. I wonder what was their experience. These are literal things we discuss in class before we get to any content. And in so doing, I may not even use this language per se, what I'm about to say, but I'm trying to prepare them, hopefully, for a life when they will have difficult conversations as an adult professional, whatever they choose to be, that they have formative experience of that in the classroom. Another way to put this, my friends, is we have to stop outsourcing DEI to Res Life and the diversity office. We have to stop waiting for the MLK celebration to talk about issues of inclusion and equity. We have to move beyond, let's get a few black and brown slides in my PowerPoint presentation, and that counts as an inclusive classroom. We have to think not of what we want students to know and or not even what we want them to do. We have to think of who we want them to become. And if that's your guiding question, the ways in which they are able to engage with each other respectfully becomes a thing you have to backward design and include actual activities to do. Last but not least, the social contract is an open conversation that science is beautiful. We got a vaccine in like 2 hours because of science. I love it. I'm not gonna, this is not a class about just how dark and how bad and how, shitty everybody is. No, it's not that. It's telling the whole story. And part of the story is to admit when we made mistakes. And when you dig into these stories, you realize that though they are often presented as stories about race and racism, they're really, at its root, stories about power. It's about a doctor who took her cells. Yes, there was rampant racism at the time, but the thing about that book that really got me is he didn't think it was a big deal. There was no moral quandary in the taking of her cells. It wasn't like he snuck up at night to do it. He just took it. Because when you have no agency, and when everyone understands that, they're able to define your reality for you. And so the ways in which some of these play out today, I mean, yes, we're not stealing cells like with Henrietta Lacks, although we could talk about the DNA from Native Americans in Arizona. That was relatively recently. But we are allowing professors to go from university to university with sexual harassment complaints against them. And it's only at university number 9 then we finally fire them. Like we still have issues of power. We're still allowing these things to be under the carpet until a few whistleblowers bring it to light. The power hasn't gone away. Maybe the manifestations of that may have changed, but we still have issues of power. And I want them to understand that. So we had 4 sections. There were actually 3 sections of this class. And then when I came, they created a separate section. And of course, me being the wild child, brought in all my techniques. And it was just sort of an assumed thing that the class had a 30 to 40% DFW rate. When you disaggregated that, it went up for students of color, 2-3 times the rate of white students. Our first semester was pretty much the same thing. And we made one critical decision, which we have a paper coming out about that, looked at 5 years of data before and during the implementation, is we started to cut content. We cut about 40% of the curriculum that we were handed. And the idea was that if you are going to do things that are inclusive, if you are going to teach them the skills of being civically engaged and doing dialogues, even in a science classroom, you have to be willing to talk about less stuff. So almost immediately, you brought that DFW rate down to below 10%, wiped out any outcome gaps, and that remained throughout. But of course, as you can imagine, the concern was, well, if you're going to teach less stuff, you're making the class easy. And oh, by the way, that's very unethical because when they go on to a new class, they'll fall flat on their face. And I knew that was coming. So what we do is we track them, right? We looked at how they performed in future classes. This particular data set is how they performed in the very next class. So you're looking at the students from each section, And their final grade, so your vertical column is grade in GPA points, right? In that second semester. So bear in mind, section 4 was exposed to about 40% less content. We actually have the data for when they went on to their sophomore year, and the gap widens. I know cutting content is scary for people, but if you do focus on skill development, I'm here to tell you that they will be fine. Even if the points were actually on the same height, I could tell you, look, we told them a lot less than they're doing just as well. Like, what exactly is your excuse? So I just want to leave you with 3 parting suggestions. And I know this is just one talk, right? You know, if this was a 2-3 day workshop, we'd go through the whole curriculum, we'd give you more examples of this. But to the extent that many, if not all of you, are people who are always thinking of your class critically and not just thinking of a new strategy to do, but thinking of ways just philosophically you can reframe what it means to teach in a classroom. My first advice is to really know who's in front of you. Not just they happen to have a student ID number, not that it came from Bio 101 and now it's Bio 102. Know who comes to your university, what neighborhoods they come from, what schools they come from. How do they identify? What kinds of social and psychological challenges and successes they might have being in that space. And there are tools to do that. Have them do reflection assignments, have them do strengths-based surveys, get to know them. And then design for not just technical growth, but social and psychological growth. Design your class in ways that you tap into their motivations, that you tap into the ways in which people feel belonging in spaces like your classroom. Don't just assume that just because you have 15 weeks worth of content means that somebody feels like a physicist or like a future physician when they sit in your classroom. And last but not least, assess everything you do. I mean, I put here track student pathways, but tracking their pathways really just focuses on the academic assessment. I am also asking you to assess for belonging, assess for sense of community. There are rubrics out there, there are surveys out there. If you have the resources, you can do focus groups. You can add things to your student evaluation of teaching depending on what company you use. There are ways to get this, but don't just tell yourself that just because you did an inclusive strategy, you are now doing things well. In the same way you would assess or have a key performance indicator of any aspect of your institution, you need to have that for your DEI efforts as well. So I'll stop there for now. Who knows, maybe we'll have a future conversation. Who knows, maybe in person. But if I don't get a chance to hear from you in this Q&A, this is how you find me. Again, I really wish I was there in person, but for now, I really thank you for your attention. Now I'm going to just imagine you in a room full of people giving me a round of applause. We have about 10 minutes, maybe?
Yep, that's about right. So yes, thank you very much, Brian. And yes, let's take some questions.
Feel free to use the raise hand function. Maha.
Hi. So I'm sorry, I'm walking around the house, but anyway.
That's all right.
So I have a question for you because as you were talking, I so want you to come to my campus and talk to our STEM folks because their eyes glaze over when I try to say these things and they don't understand. Like they say rigor. I'm like, yes, giving them a hard exam, but not equipping them to answer the exam is not rigor.
Right.
The students try telling them that in focus groups and they still don't want to listen to that. So I'm just, other than bringing you over and asking you to develop our education program for STEM faculty, what are some of the things that you think work with people who are like engineers? And no offense to anyone who's engineer, I'm a computer scientist originally. There's a level of sort of arrogance that that they don't trust what I have to say.
Yeah, I mean, I completely understand what you're saying. And first of all, I would love to come to Cairo. Let's just put that out there. What I've found, and I learned this as a grad student when I started to engage in this kind of work, but then also as a faculty member, is education is really people business. The content is stuff, we want to develop experts in different things, but sort of the practice of education is people business, right? So you're either trying to cultivate students and change hearts and minds in that, or you're trying to do that with colleagues or chairs or provosts or deans. And I think we underestimate how the people skills aspect of our jobs is necessary to really make real change work. So specific to your question, Maha, and I speak not just of engineers, but maybe just STEM faculty in general in my experience, I've recognized humbly that many people are changed by different things. And so therefore, if you're a faculty developer or change agent, however you define yourself, you need to be able to employ a number of different things to, and for some, find that for some of them, the light bulb will just go on in thing B versus thing A, right? Sometimes it's, you're saying the exact same thing for 5 years, but then when Brian shows up, suddenly it's like, oh, okay, I get it. You don't know why, but for some people, that's the way it is. Some people need to see the publication I mentioned, right? They just, they need to see that bar graph and the p-values and the error bar. They need to see all of that. They need to see that that's evidence. Some people needed to hear from the students who were in my class, who are now in their class, and saying, no. I had a different experience, and now I know what I can demand from my education, right? Some people, quite frankly, need a dean to come knock on the door and said, man, things got to change like tonight, right? On some ways, I get it. Like, I'm not trying to absolve faculty here, but I understand to a certain extent if you were brought up in a system that taught you that your professional sense of worth is based 100% on your subject matter expertise. And then the Mahas and Brians of the world comes along to tell you that you don't just get to walk in a room and talk about stuff, right? There's a little bit of a politically threatening feeling that can come with that. So, and I'm sure you've experienced this firsthand, right? So I don't want to say you need to massage your message, but we both understand we have to be in spaces where we have to hear some difficult things and try all these 5, 6 different approaches and hope that one of them sort of sticks. And when they do stick, when they do come, not make them feel bad about it. Now, okay, now you see what I'm saying, right? But just be happy that they're at the table and work with that. It does make this emotionally exhausting work because you have to put up with a lot of stuff before you get the tiny victory. But if we are backward designing from a goal of we want everybody at the table doing this good work, then we kind of had to put up with it a little bit. So I'm happy to talk more with you about it, but that's a really, really good question. And maybe next time we'll talk about it, we'll be in Cairo. Just saying.
So we have a question from John in the chat. Beautiful talk. What are your thoughts on stereotype threat and how have you handled this?
Yeah, a couple of things with stereotype threat. And for those who may not know what it is, you could read the book Wisdom for Value by Dr. Claude Steele, and it's a brilliant summary of it. And it's this idea that if you are aware of a stereotype associated with your identity and your identity was pointed out in a situation, the awareness of the stereotype and your identity being sort of put in a spotlight can make you actually have a decreased performance. And they've done a lot of elegant studies with this, Black men in math classes, white men running sprint races, just really, really interesting studies. And one of the things in those studies, I don't know, John, if you read the book or not, well, I'm assuming you have, is it mostly worked, the effect of the stereotype threat mostly worked with only the high-performing students. When they ran some of the same studies on, I guess I'll use academically challenged for now, in the same California area, they didn't find the same effect. So it was good to kind of have that nuance, reported. The other thing with stereotype threat and there's a whole suite of what is called identity contingencies that the Stanford psychology department basically, all the mindset work, stereotype threat, affirmation theory, it's it's like they all had a faculty meeting and published like 100 things, right? The key with it is, directly to your question, John, is to not assume that because somebody identifies as a minority or from a marginalized background means that they will definitely have stereotypes, right? The key is when you design your class is to be aware of the possibility of it, right? Not that it's for sure, it's not that it's deterministic. The other thing I will quickly say to it, the last couple of chapters of Wissing Vivaldi, Dr. Steele actually gives some really, really good advice on how you address stereotype threat. And one of the things he talks about is how to give feedback, right? The example I gave on feedback earlier in this talk, some of it was informed by his relationship with his advisor and, and how he was treated. He was treated well, right? So he gives some really, really good practical suggestions about how you reacted. But again, I think one key takeaway here is don't just assume that just because somebody's Black or brown in your class, you're going to have this or any other contingency. You just have to prepare for the possibility and know the signs if you see it. Thanks, John. Well, maybe we don't have any more questions, but hopefully you do still have the email slide that I just put up, or Twitter, or whichever is your preferred way of communicating. I just want to shout out Amy Jo. I saw you on screen. Amy and I met at a residency that I ran a year ago, and part of just a really special group of faculty who we did some faculty development with. So good to see you here today. But thank you again for having me. And I wish you good luck and with the rest of the conference.
Well, once again, thank you so much. Yes, please once again help me thank Brian for a wonderful, motivating talk. I am proud of myself for not typing amen in the chat repeatedly. But
I'm offended that you didn't.
But thank you so much. Our next session starts at 2:10, so there's time for a little stretch and refill your beverages and look at something that's not a screen for a little while. And thank you so much.
Bye. Thank you. Bye, Amy. Bye, everyone.